Thank you all for joining us. Good evening and welcome to Together Women Rise's book club event. My name is Vicki Bush Joseph, and I'm a volunteer member of Rise's book club committee. I'm also a regional leader for Rise, and I'm a board member. I will be your moderator, together with Wesley Howell, another volunteer on our book club committee. We are so pleased to have all of you here tonight to discuss an inspiring and impactful book and an important issue affecting women and girls globally, female genital mutilation or cutting. Before we get started, just as a quick reminder, we do have a lot of people joining us. So remember, on Zoom, for this kind of thing, please mute yourself and keep yourself on mute until we break out into the small groups later. You can use the chat. If you have questions for our speaker, please put those in the chat. That's where we will pick those up. And also just a quick reminder that once our speaker does start, you could put yourself in speaker mode and be able to see the speaker a little bit better. So I see that we have members, we have guests, we have others who may be completely new to Together Women Rise. All are welcome. Together Women Rise is a powerful community of women and allies that has been dedicated to achieving global gender equality for the past 20 years. We have hundreds of local chapters across the United States where members learn about gender equality issues, give grants to organizations that empower women and girls in low-income countries, and build community to forge meaningful connections with each other and with women and girls around the world. Our book club is another way to engage in our mission, to learn about global gender equality issues, and to experience community with others who care about making the world a better place for women and for girls. For more information on our book club and to get involved with Together Women Rise, please visit our website at togetherwomenrise.org. And here I'm going to give a quick plug. While you're on our website, please check out our upcoming 20th anniversary celebrations. I'm hosting one here in Chicago a week from Saturday, Friday and Saturday. There's another one coming up in Phoenix, and then one last celebration in Washington, D.C. Lots of fun, lots of great speakers. So if you're close to us or want to do a road trip, check out the information at the website at togetherwomenrise.org. But back to tonight, we are discussing the book, The Girls in the Wild Fig Tree by Nice Lengete. First, we will hear from our guest speaker, and then we will break off into small groups to discuss the book and the topic of female genital mutilation. Even if you haven't read the book, please stick around for those small groups because it's a nice way to connect with other people around the country or around the world, in tonight's case, who have similar interests. The girls in the, and then also stay till to the end when we come back together, because we have a book giveaway with our upcoming book that you'll want to hear about too. So the book for tonight, The Girls in the Wild Fig Tree, tells the story of the author who was raised in a Maasai village in Kenya. Her journey from, quote, heartbroken child and community outcast to leader of the Maasai, close quote, is an inspiration and a reminder that one person can change the world and every girl is worth saving. A central theme in the book is the author's efforts to escape the cut, a painful and sometimes deadly practice, which was the fate of all Maasai women. For our guest speaker tonight, we are thrilled to have Shivangi Misra. Shivangi is focused on ending the harmful practice of female genital mutilation, cutting, through her role as Global Legacy Advisor at Equality Now. Equality Now is one of Together Women Rise's transformation partners. Shivangi has worked on the first ever case in India, seeking a prohibition on FGM in that country, and served on the End End FGM Canada Network Board for 2 years. She collaborates with survivor-centric organizations, including in the United States. She is focused on breaking myths and stereotypes about FGMC in North American society. Welcome, Shivangi. I'm going to now turn this over to my co-moderator, to Wesley Howell, for our conversation with Shivangi. There will be time for questions from the audience. So if you have a question for our speaker, please put that in the chat. Wesley.
Thank you. And welcome to Shivangi. We're just so glad to be able to have you with us tonight. And let's start out talking maybe about the prevalence of FGM and cutting, how that kind of works with the mission of equality now, and where is it most prevalent?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Wesley and Vicky. First of all, I want to thank all of you and Together Women Rise for having me here today. I'm very delighted to see so many people who are interested on this important issue, because one of the key areas of work that lies ahead of us is raising awareness. So events like this is just such a motivating factor to that and contributes towards ending the practice. I'm really glad to be here and see this event. So I'll start with the prevalence issue. And how does it fit in with what Equality Now does and many other organizations similar to us are doing? I'll start off with saying, contrary to popular belief and sometimes what we see in the mainstream, FGM is a global issue. It is practiced in every region of the world, every continent in the world, except for Antarctica. So that's the extent of the issue that we're dealing with. We have the numbers, we have estimates of how much it's practiced. However, I will start with the disclaimer that these numbers are what we have in terms of in places where we have the statistics or the data is prevalent, but it is an incomplete picture. We do not actually have data from countries that we know that FGM exists in those countries. We have anecdotal evidence. We have qualitative analysis. We have survivors coming out of regions that are saying that FGM is prevalent and practiced in those regions, but we do not have official statistics and numbers at the moment. So keeping that in mind, we know, these are the numbers coming out of UN agencies. We know that at this moment, as of today, more than 200 million girls and women all over the world have been subjected to female genital mutilation. And we know that we have evidence of this FGM being practiced in at least 92 countries in the world. Majority of these countries, out of these 92, we know that about more than 50% of these countries are in the African region, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa and in Arab states. But we know that these are also practiced in some Asian states, in some select Asian countries, Eastern Europe, and we will talk more about how it's present in North American society. We know it's present in Latin American cultures and other societies as well. Now, it is an interesting thing that you may have high prevalence of FGM in certain regions, but you may not have high number of survivors because of how global the world is. There's a lot of migration and a lot of other regions. And even that is not the sole reason for it to exist in countries, contrary to popular beliefs. But that is what we have to look at, that sometimes survivors are in high numbers, even in countries where there may not be a high prevalence or high rate of the practice. So we keep that full picture in mind as we speak about prevalence rates in the world. So these numbers, like I said, 27 to 28 countries in Africa are known to have FGM, which has the highest rate of prevalence. But we also have anecdotal evidence, what I mentioned in the beginning. So for example, we know that there are survivors in South Africa, in Libya, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but that won't come up. They don't have the statistics. We know that in Iran, where civil society, survivor groups, and human rights advocates have been collecting data, there's a high number of survivors and prevalence in certain regions of Iran, but there's no official statistics and no law on FGM at the moment. So that kind of gives us the picture of how prevalent the practice practices. Now, Equality Now we are a feminist organization. We are an international human rights organization, and FGM is globally considered it is an international human rights violation. It is considered a form of torture. It is it is considered a systemic gender-based violence. It is gender-based violence. It is rooted in patriarchy, and so Equality Now. We are an international human rights organization working to promote gender equality in the world. And our method of doing that is law, so legal reform and systemic changes. So we focus on 4 areas. One of them is achieving legal equality. One of them is ending harmful practices, under which child marriage and FGM are one of the most prominent issues in the world that we are engaging with. We also work on ending sexual exploitation in the world and also ending sexual violence. All of them, as we all know, are interconnected and very closely connected to each other. So not to say that they're separate, but every issue requires its own unique systemic response. And we can talk more about why FGM is unique in its own way.
Good, thank you. Thank you for that overview. The author of our book talks about one of her aims in writing the book is to dispel myths. And what are some of those myths? It sounds like we've already started to talk about some myths of prevalence or some myths of geographic isolation, but what are some of the other myths about FGM?
Mm-hmm. So FGM is unique. I will say it is unique because all practices and harmful practices are subject to material conditions and local conditions, right? However, there are many myths attached to FGM because of how deeply rooted it is in our social norms. So, for example, I'll give you many examples, but one of that comes to mind right in the beginning is that it is rooted in religion. Now, actually, there is evidence that FGM exists in the world way before any biblical religion or in the Torah, the Quran, the Bible, in Hinduism, in Judaism, in any religion, in Buddhism. FGM, there's no mention of FGM. It is created through social practice. It is not something that is rooted in religion. However, like many other vices, it sometimes can be used as a defense, and that can be used as these false narratives are created. That's one of the myths that needs to be combated and ended. Another myth is that the way people justify it is that it makes a woman clean, more pure. Now, we can talk about how these myths have these arrive in different parts of the world. I'll give you an example. When I was in India, I heard that it is because during the war times, men would go away and they did not want the women to be sexually attracted to other men. That's why they would subject women to FGM. One other myth that because it is known to affect women's libido, their sexual desire, and that is how it is used. So the way FGM is rooted, it is rooted in a desire to control women's bodily autonomy and their sexuality. And that is the root cause of this. It is patriarchy and misogyny. And that is what continues. People continue to defend it under the umbrella of misogyny and patriarchy. So controlling women's bodily autonomy and sexual desires. I'll give you an example which we don't often hear of is in United States, for example. It began there is evidence of this being used to cure lesbianism, to cure masturbation. So it was actually gynecologists were recommending these for so-called medical reasons. But we know that those outdated views and those unscientific views, but FGM was used to combat that. So it's there are definitely a lot of myths that are attached to it, but they are simply not true. And I think one of the things that I will just reemphasize is often women are cut as, I don't know if I mentioned it, but they're often cut as infants. And in their adolescent years, and in sometimes unusual, but sometimes also adult women are subjected to it. But the reason why it's done so early is also to make them clean and pure for their male partners and considered to be beautiful and clean. And that also results in very closely connected to child marriage. So that women are not swayed by and are only pure for their male husbands. So that's one of the reasons as well.
So when you have myths like that are so deeply ingrained in a culture, a society, I don't even know how to articulate it. How do you dispel that then? How do you work on dispelling those myths?
Well, I'm sure it'll come to no surprise to anyone, but we need to, re-emphasize that every opportunity we get is education, education, education. And but education of whom, right? Like we often think that it's the women who have to be educated, or just the male men in society, or people, without any gender are educated. However, it has to be a very concerted effort. Of course, education, exposure, and access, right, to education, to higher knowledge, to understanding, to scientific knowledge, but also education of practitioner, doctors, everyone that we come across in our lives. So children have to be educated as young people. So for example, a lot of times I see that in North American society, that a lot of times when a bill is being passed, it goes to the Appropriations Committee, and the funding and the budgeting will come for education for people from the migrant communities, from the newcomers, for the immigrant communities, as if it only affects people and they only target a certain population. But education is required by everybody. When we see something around us which is harming women, but sometimes people choose to target only a community, but that is not the case. As we are dispelling myths, we realize actually it is not just practiced in diaspora and immigrant communities. It is being practiced in the United States for many, many years. We don't even have the evidence of it being practiced in Asia, for example. Very recently, for example, in India, we knew that this practice is going on. Currently, Equality Now is engaging with partners on the ground in Kerala, in a state in India, which has 100% literacy rate, which is not true for any other state in the country. And yet we are finding out that there are the cases of FGM happening. So everybody needs to get educated. And we need the partnership and collaboration of men as well. In one of the studies, a qualitative studies that a survivor group did in India in 2017, they interviewed women, but they also interviewed men about, do they know about FGM and how they feel about FGM? And their responses were surprising. Like, they were not supportive of FGM. They actually did not want to marry women who've been subjected to FGM, which completely contradicts as to the purpose and the defense of FGM. So education requires that research, training, outreach, judges. We have laws against FGM all over the world, but there are no prosecutions. Canada has had law since, like, I think the 80s. We have no prosecution. 60s in the United States, no prosecution. Recently, the first ever case in the UK was prosecuted in 2019. I'm not supporting prosecution here, or law enforcement. All I'm saying is that despite the prevalence, the very few judges, teachers, and I know I want to stick to the time, but something else comes to mind recently that actually pointed to the education bit a little bit more, is in Quebec, in Canada, 2 childcare workers saw a very young child with some scar tissue and thought that the child might have been subjected to FGM. So they called the Child Protection Services, and the Child Protection Services said, "Oh, this is too sensitive a topic for us to deal with." And later it was decided, when it went to Human Rights Commission, that it could not have been FGM. But despite that, what it revealed was that when you take people who are caregivers or care providers, they don't even know. And this is a federal law against FGM, and it was too sensitive for them. So how do we protect women? By dispelling these myths, but education and training cannot be replaced by law enforcement. It has to start there.
And you alluded to time, and I'm going to actually jump down, I think, to another question on our list, which is more than what motivates countries and people to eliminate the practice. Kind of what are the levers, who are the most influential people that you find to work with in regards to making the change, and what is, you talked about some of the ways that you try to influence change. Are there others?
Yeah, of course, survivors. I think it's difficult, it's challenging for them, but without them, we wouldn't know, because we are still learning in our society, and we're still finding out, and we're sharing knowledge, and realizing that it's a global movement and it's practiced in different ways, but there's this connecting thread. And because of how we are traveling all over the world and how we live in the world today, we're migrating everywhere. It is really important to join forces and build momentum together. So definitely survivors. They know their unique needs, they know their healthcare in different ways, everything that they require, and for them to lead this fight and the struggle against ending FGM. So that's one for sure. The second thing I would say is, which women, men, everything that I've listed so far, just across sectors. So it just cannot be focused on law enforcement. It just cannot be the police. It cannot be the judges or the lawyers in the room. We have to include teachers. We have to include childcare, all care providers. Everyone has to be included in this. Nurses, doctors, everyone, because there's something called medicalizing FGM, which is when certain from doctors, or they basically, instead of full cutting, they sometimes nick or prick, and they say that, this is a cleaner practice, but it is not so. It is still absolutely a human rights violation. So doing so without a woman's consent and for no medical reason. FGM is known to have no medical purposes or benefits at all. In fact, it is killing women all over the world. So one important piece of this puzzle are the religious and faith leaders, which we often don't connect with into ending other practices. We have to engage with them. It is not a choice. We have to engage with them and bring them into the conversation. So faith leaders, community leaders, people who are influencing men, women, and children, and people of all gender, we have to get them into the conversation. For example, in Iran, the religious leader, the supreme religious leader of the country, he did not condemn the practice, but he clarified that it is not related to Quran. It is not an Islamic practice. And that is a small step, and a lot of work left to be done in Iran, and a lot of work left to be done in terms of gender equality all over the world. But that's a step forward. And so we have to engage with them and see how we can influence communities who are living because it's a systemic problem and it requires that level of response.
And then that kind of takes us then back to, we learned in the book that I think Kenya legislated against FGM in 2011. The Maasai people stopped practicing, or officially stopped practicing, in 2014. What are some other success stories? I love the small one that you shared there from Iran, and the idea that this is built of small steps. What are some other success stories you can share?
So I would start with the two ways to look at it. One is the legal changes that are happening, right? So for example, countries are coming together at the international level and committing themselves to ending the practice, which was not true like a decade ago. There are countries that are passing legislations and actively at the global level saying, okay, we are committed to it. We're going to bring in the law. We're going to provide education. So there is this joint resolutions being passed at the United Nations and at other levels to end FGM. So there's a global commitment, which is refreshing. It is new. It starts there. I would also say that, for example, in Kenya, in the Maasai community, we know, because one of my colleagues who did a conference there a few days ago, actually, it is still being practiced in Maasai community. It is not completely removed, but it's a first step to bringing in the legislation, but there are specific communities who are stopping. One example I can think of is, of course, when I said there was a successful prosecution in the UK of a woman who subjected her 3-year-old child to FGM. We are also looking at, I'll give you an example from North America. Washington State passed a law this year banning FGM, prohibiting and actually introducing a very comprehensive state law, which includes provisions for vacation cutting. You cannot use culture or religion as a defense in the court of law. It doesn't apply to adult women, but the statute of limitation is high. Even as adult women, you can still file, because usually they happen so young, and as an adult woman, when you're remembering and you're acknowledging it, you can go back and file a case. So these things, sorry, I forgot, but when I was mentioning Washington State, another one that comes to mind, Massachusetts has passed a terrific law, which is interesting. Why I'm mentioning these state laws, even though a lot of states in the US have laws against FGM, is because they're one of the few states that passed a law. Like California was one of the first states to pass it, but the law is quite it's quite regressive. It focuses on immigrant communities. It does not have provision for vacation cutting, provisions like this. So we not only have to pass laws in every state, we also have to strengthen the laws that we do have so that they don't end up having harmful impact on the community that we're actually trying to serve. So there are these nuances, which I can go on forever, but in the interest of time, I will stop. Successes that we have like never seen before amount of laws coming up, and they're not just law enforcement focused. Like I said, we have education and training and other things that are being built. Media trainings are happening. We did media training for journalists in Canada because they're too afraid to cover the news because they think, oh, what if it has racial undertones and it won't be accepted. But we talked to them and we said, if you are not covering this, you're not doing the work, right? Like you're not doing what you're supposed to do. So I think we're building that momentum.
Well, and that kind of brings us to maybe our final question until we open it to Q&A of, you talked about the prevalence in North America, and you talked about the importance of strong laws in the US, and you used the phrase vacation cutting. And I wanted to know if you want to talk just a little bit about more the prevalence in North America and this concept of vacation cutting.
Yeah. Absolutely. So North America, for example, just United States, we have the CDC estimates are at 513,000 women, 513,000 women have been subjected to or are at risk of FGM. The way it's calculated, again, a disclaimer, is on immigration and the countries that they believe are known to have high prevalence rates. That does not include countries that does not have we know anecdotally, but they don't have the evidence, for example. Also, they're not counting FGM practices within the US. So there are examples of Orthodox Christian women in Midwest who have come out and shared that they were subjected to FGM as children. So in a lot of Orthodox Christian communities, FGM is being practiced at the community level. Also, they're not counting women who are immigrating from India, who may have been subjected to in India, but India is not counted as a high prevalence state. So these numbers are actually quite conservative, but they're still alarming. And if you go to if you just Google CDC FGM prevalence in the US, you'll get the rate for every state. In fact, Equality Now recently launched a state-by-state map. And what it does, if you can hover over the map and it'll tell you each state how much the women are at risk and how many of them have been subjected to based on the latest available data from 2013. But it also tells you the applicable law. So the survivors can see which laws apply to them, the statute of limitation, and what provisions they have. Some of them that we promote and we want states to have is vacation cutting. And vacation cutting is the phenomena where a girl is transported to another region, another jurisdiction, to be subjected to FGM. It may, for many reasons, it can be to your home country. So that person may be taking them back to India, for example, or other country to get them cut. Or for example, Connecticut doesn't have a law. So, but there is a federal law, but there'll be lesser implementation in Connecticut, for example, than Massachusetts or Washington State. So women can be taken from Washington State to Connecticut to get cut, and so to be subjected to FGM. So that is vacation cutting. And that should be illegal, and it is illegal in many states, that you will not be protected in your state if you transported the girl to another jurisdiction to subject them to this violence. And the US has, so for example, currently we have 41 states that have laws on FGM. We need comprehensive state law because state laws have higher reach than federal law, as we all know. It is more effective in reaching people, can actually control state agencies because, like I said, law enforcement is not the end goal. The end goal is education, and public officials need to get on board. Yeah, so that's the picture in the landscape in the United States. And again, a lot of harm and myths have to be dispelled because it is still very much considered an immigrant issue. And we know that is not the case, and it is not helpful. It is not helpful to solve the problem. In fact, if you don't remove the taboo, you're going to put the practice more into secrecy, which is not the end goal here. So I hope I answered. If I missed anything, please remind me. I'll be happy to.
I think that is a beautiful place to transition. And I can see out of the corner of my eye, the chat is just going nuts. So I'm thinking that either Kia or Jenny are going to maybe bring us some questions from the chat.
Yeah, well, it seems like we have a lot of folks who've worked in this topic and with this topic on our call today, which will be great for our breakout groups. But one of the questions that we have are, well, a few of them you got to, but how FGM is connected to child marriage? Why are they considered part of the process into child marriage?
Absolutely. So, like I mentioned at FGM, a lot of when the girls are subjected to FGM, or when from infancy to adolescent, preparing them for marriage, to be considered, to be prepared for their husbands and their future partners. So that is how it is connected to child marriage. A lot of times, when women are cut, so the underlying belief is similar and how they're interconnected. The reason why women are being subjected to FGM are also the reasons why they want women to be married off early, to not be a burden, to be someone else's property, and to control their bodily autonomy. And in most societies, when you control a woman's bodily autonomy and sexuality, it is very closely connected to them being married to a male partner immediately. As soon as they can be out of the property of their parents, they're then transferred to the property of the male partner. And that is the culture that is the root of both of these practices. And also, not just if you understand the background and the underlying myths attached to it, it is also seen in prevalence and practice. So in societies where there's high level of FGM, there's also child marriage being practiced. So those connectedness has to be examined as well.
Another question is about kind of the dangers of FGM and what the mortality rates are, or other kind of side effects that come along with FGM.
Yeah, so the mortality rate, first, okay, I shall go back. Any conversation on FGM has to be accompanied by, we don't have the full picture. So where everything I say is what we know, and it could be worse, and we are certain that it is worse than what we know. So the mortality rate has been known to be 1 in 500 cases. It may seem like less compared to other, but it is a lot. 1 is too many. For being cut as children, for being subjected to this as infants. And the side effects are many and still being studied. So at the physical aspects of it, severe bleeding, because a lot of these, in many countries, this is being practiced by razors or like knives. They're not practiced. They're not, there's no high-tech medical tools that are being used. Even if they were, they are definitely, it is still a form of violence. But these traditional knives and razors are being used to cut women. They are not sterilized. They're being used on many children. They're used by traditional, people in the communities in secrecy and as a hidden practice. So naturally, from these, as you can imagine, there are other side effects. One of them is severe bleeding, physical pain during urination, has been reported in a lot of cases. Childbirth is a very painful process for women survivors, and for people who've been subjected to FGM. Mental depression, mental effects of this. Of course, the other things that often women have reported is extreme pain during sexual intercourse. Because it depends which type of FGM that you've been subjected to. There are 4 types of FGM, and one of them is the genitalia sewn together, and that can cause extreme amount of pain, especially during sexual intercourse. And it also, which is called infibulation, and in that they also have to be reversed for childbirth, for urination, for sexual intercourse. Also being protected for the male partner and so on. So I don't want to get too graphic into it, because I do not know if there are any survivors on this call, and I would not want to do that. But there's a lot of resources available online, WHO, and you can go to Equality Now's website, and we've dealt with this in depth. It is important to keep talking about this, but the effects of FGM is lifelong. It is something that survivors have to deal with for their entire lives. Also, some women have trouble sitting, walking. So it affects every aspect of your life for the rest of your life.
So we just have, I think, time for one more question. Obviously, the book that we read talked about the Maasai people in particular. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with them, but do you know why this community, the Maasai community, had such high prevalence of FGM?
Mm-hmm. So I would not want to guess that. I do not know. I will have to ask my colleagues from the community and from the region who can answer that better. But I will just comment on that, though, and say that it is not unique. 94% and that high level of prevalence, it is not unique to the Maasai community. So I wouldn't say that why is it high in the Maasai community? It is 99% in Somalia in different communities. It is close to above 90% in Egypt. It is a phenomena that is occurring in many societies at that extent and at that level. So I don't think it's unique to Maasai community, and I wouldn't say that it's practiced high only there. I think they shared histories and shared cultures, and not no, I wouldn't say culture, but shared social norms have impacted many communities. And the reasons that I had mentioned earlier, more often than not, they're rooted in those practices, which is patriarchy and how it manifests in different societies.
Well, great. Thank you. Thank you, Kia, our volunteer coordinator and staff member, for facilitating the questions that came up. I'm sure there are more. And thank you, Wesley, for the questions. And last but certainly not least, Shivangi, thank you so much for sharing your all of this information. It can be a bit overwhelming, I think, but it certainly prepares us to not only discuss this book, but to think about what we can do. And certainly by partnering with Equality Now, Together Women Rise as a collective organization is helping. And because we are collaborating with Equality Now and helping to change laws and change awareness and education. And then, as part of our organization, part of our goal is education of our members. And I've certainly learned a lot about this particular topic for women and girls, and I'm sure others have as well. And our featured grantee this month for Together Women Rise is also an organization that works with survivors and victims of FGM. So that's another way to help women and girls undergoing this practice, is by becoming involved with Together Women Rise.